Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Jennifer Harris, continuing with our blog series, Am I in Trouble? And in episode 2 today, we are going to talk about how these early stories of family of origin roles that led to these attachment styles and these underlying beliefs about ourself that we can discover through reflection using Enneagram types, how these work together to kind of hold in place not only our fear about am I in trouble being about relationships with people, but also how this expands to how we view authority in general and God, and how these ways that we have been misshapen also then misshapes how we picture God. What if the fear of being in trouble isn't just about people? It's also about how we picture God and how these early experiences distort not only how we see ourselves, not only how we see ourselves in connection to other people in relationship, but also how we mimic those patterns of behavior and belief with God, with our experience and encounter and trust and reliance on and the ability to rest in God, in the divine presence that lives around us all the time. So, we spent our last episode and supplemental videos talking about these stories and how they have been shaped in us. And our image of God, and by extension, authority figures on the planet, reflect these early stories. They reflect our early attachment stories. They reflect our early family role stories. And so, because these stories create a false self story about me, then we must construct a version of God that mirrors the caretakers, the caregivers that we built that false self story in response to. So the way that we learn to relate to authority in childhood shapes how we relate to authority and God in adulthood. These attachment styles, family roles, Enneagram personality patterns, all can be distorted and then shape not only ourselves, but also what we see God as. So our false self creates then a false God. And if we can keep in mind as we start to ask some of these questions that these false self structures were protective, they were a projection, they were a coping style that was rooted in I have to survive. Most of us learn these because of lack of safety. And so any perceived handhold that we could use to stay safe was better than nothing. So remembering that as we experience our caregivers in ways that distort our true self image, the true self that was created, like I like to say, in love, capital L, by love, for love, the way that God in the biblical creation story, for example, pronounced humans as very, very good, that we lose connection to that goodness because of how we have perceived and experienced our childhood caregiving roles. And so the false self forms when we adjust our behavior to maintain connection to safety, when we have imperfect authority figures, imperfect caregivers. Now remember, nobody is perfect. And yet, if we look at it through the lens of attachment style, for example, we know that imperfect does not necessarily always lead to an insecure attachment. if our caregivers are learning and self-aware enough to be able to repair after rupture, to give space for both the individual within the connection to community, with the ability to hold space for differing viewpoints and the non-demand for conformity in order to belong. Those are some of the ways that we learn that it's okay to be me and I still get to be part of we. So when that doesn't happen in a reliable or consistent way, then we develop these false ways of looking at ourselves. I have to be this instead of who I am to survive. I have to be this instead of who I am to be safe. I have to be this instead of who I am to belong, to be connected, to be in the group. So authority, as we get older, then is shaped in connection to our early caregivers, because our early caregivers are our first image experience of power, of overness, of the people that are above me. And this embeds a view of authority based on how we experienced our caregivers. When authority is safe, meaning, as I stated before, ways that we earn secure attachment, the ways that we're allowed healthy self-expression, the ways that we are able to stay aligned with who we truly are and still be safe, still be attuned to, still be in, then our our experience of authority is safe. Our experience of authority is that I can maneuver and move within these structures and I will be okay. But when authority that we experience in our early parents and caregivers, when that is unsafe, inconsistent, the child learns to adapt to protect connection. And this is where the false self emerges, right? That these adaptations, the ways that we shape shift in order to stay safe, in order to maintain connection, in order to survive, depending on where you are on the spectrum of this story, these adaptations that I call the false self become templates later for how we relate to God. What does that look like? And moreover, what's the problem? This is, I'm thinking if there is another way I want to say this, but no, I think I'm just going to say it bluntly and clearly. These false views of self that we then project the opposite, right? We have this false self of us, then we need the other person, the authority figure, to play the role of the caregiver, meaning I have to be this, meaning God has to be this to make that work. So in my experience, as in my own story journey, and also in my experience working with other people in their own story journey, the false self that we believe we have to be safe, connected, to belong, to get love, is a hard enough story to wrestle with, because we are disrupting the foundations of how we've existed. But moreover, the challenges of how this has created a version of God becomes the biggest challenge towards change. People get so rooted in this version of God that anything else is terrifying. It doesn't compute. It doesn't seem allowed. It seems like I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to do something wrong. I'm going to get struck by lightning. I'm going to make God so mad by changing this belief about myself and God that that false self, false God structure stands in the very way of the healing people come to me to pursue. It's a straitjacket in so many ways. And the invitation is, what else could be possible? What if we took the risk to take God, to experience the divine, to experience the otherness that is all around us in a way that moves us towards freedom rather than keeping us stuck, that moves towards daring to take God at God's word that stands on love and grace and mercy and kindness and forgiveness and second chances and 320 second chances, rather than these views of God that we have, which are all geared towards fear and punishment. We are already living in fear and punishment. Because when we are stuck and held and constrained and straitjacketed into these ways of being that go against our true self, that go against and hide and shove down and cover up our true self, we are already living in fear of punishment. We are already living stunted. We are already living like cattle in veal chutes. We are all living in ways that keep us from flourishing. And at some point, the invitation is to take the risk that what we're seeking that keeps us so afraid is actually what is keeping us held in bondage, that is keeping us from the very healing things that we need, which is a fuller, more surrendered, letting go in the best possible sense of control and leaning, falling, releasing into grace. In my own story, this has been a huge shift for me. The template that I had for authority in my family of origin growing up was very rigid and legalistic. And I often joke that the Harris family motto was, I am right, which is, when you get more than one person in the room, a little bit confusing, because how can everyone be right? And this need to prove yourself and to defend your point of view and to always be on guard, to argue and debate. There was no just being. And for somebody like me, who, when I am put on the spot like that, interestingly enough, I lose my words. I lose my sense of being able to form a coherent thought. And so there was no way I ever learned to defend my position. So I was pretty much just wrong all the time. I was the emotional one, right? It's not about that. It's about how then that authority experience shaped my view of God, who I felt standing over me, not with love, not with cover or protection, but with a clipboard, with a calculator, with a gavel, and with a sword, just waiting for me to screw up so that God could punish me. And as I have taken risk and screwed up and tested, does God's grace really show up when I take the risk to release into it? Has shifted the way that fear grips me and holds me stuck and down. Several years ago, I was in Seattle and I've done two training programs out there, and I was doing one training program, and I still remember, and I'll never forget, I was wrestling with a huge decision in my life. I was wrestling with a very hard choice about relationships, about what it meant to be me, about what it meant to be a church leader, what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be to do the right thing, what it meant to be right. And I was so twisted into such a constricted, afraid, definitely over triggered, anxious experience of myself. I was in the shower and I talk to God a lot in the shower. There's something about the water sets me a little bit more free. And I just remember not vocalizing out loud, but just my gut and my heart and my spirit and myself saying, I can't do this anymore. And I have to because there are no other choices. And this experience of other around me that says, what do you mean? And I remember clear as day, I said, if I choose this, you won't love me anymore. And without hesitation, and I don't know if it was audible, I don't care. It was so clear. God said back, try me. And I remember, I feel it now, the shackles, the straitjacket, the stuck, the fear just going, oh, because if we can't trust that grace is there to catch us when we fall, we will never leap. And if we never leap, we will never change. And if we never change, we will never experience the thriving and abundant life that is possible in this body, on this planet, in this life. I took the plunge. I made the choice. And after I made that choice, I experienced a season of such kindness, of healing and love, and this encounter with God's divine, real presence all around me in such love that I had never experienced in my whole life. I was over 40 years old and I had never experienced love like that. And what it did was set me free to choose without fear. Does that mean I make no mistakes? Of course not. It means that I am not as afraid to choose because I am not as afraid of an authority figure, a God figure standing over me, just waiting to smite me for it. That when I make a mistake, I know I can choose again. I know I can course correct. I know that there is mercy. I know that there is forgiveness. I know that there is more than fear and punishment. Hadn't fully intended on sharing all of that, but there you go. So let's do a little bit of a look at how these lenses of attachment, family role, and Enneagram style can help us unpack this transfer of caregiver authority to a false God image that we create and see how we can unhook those. So, in attachment, our early experience of authority creates either a secure or insecure attachment style. When we are securely attached, authority was both protective, but also responsive, meaning rules plus care, boundaries plus love, truth and kindness. That creates a really lovely way of having boundaries that are flexible enough to allow for life and change, but also safe enough and reliable enough that we feel held. And so you can understand how then our God image development would be God is protective and responsive. God is trustworthy and safe. God gives boundaries and they are not concrete blocks around my feet. God offers protection, but not constriction. If that's not our early experience, then we get insecurely attached. And so for anxious attachment, remember, those are the go toward people to feel safe, the people that over attach to people to feel safe, because authority was unpredictable. You had to work really hard to earn closeness or approval to be close. You had to earn love. You had to hustle super hard to go toward people and ask to be kept close. And so God, therefore, is also unpredictable. I have to work really, really hard to keep God's attention. I have to work really, really, really hard to earn any type of approval or favor. I have to work really, really hard to earn love. A God that we can't trust to love us means I will feel like I am in trouble all the time if I am not doing, if I am not doing all the work, which means we have no space for God to come to us. There's no space to rest. There's no space to not detach, but not just to attach. I have to over attach, which means I don't trust God's ability to love me or me. Avoidant attachment, authority was distant or over controlling, rigid and inflexible, emotionally distant, emotionally unavailable. So the result of avoidant attachment style is that you learn to rely only on yourself to stay safe. I can only count on me. Others are completely not reliable. I can count on me. So if I had to learn to only count on me, then God, therefore, is also distant and unreliable. God is also far away and not trustworthy to show up for me. God is just as distant, just as remote, just as cold as my early authority figures. I can't trust God to show up. I'm on my own. So the detaching of yourself from other people means I am detached from access to the divine presence that is all around me. I am unable to tap into this other energy resource, like how we plug our phones in to charge them. I have to only plug into me to charge. There's no other option. And so this false God image is that I'm going to be over here, you'd be over here, and we just stay in our lane, and distance is the only thing that I can trust. In disorganized attachment, authority was confusing. It was The person that you relied on for protection was also the person you were afraid of. If your family had stories of trauma, of abuse, of neglect, of chaos, of volatility, of up and down, it is possible that this is the story that was planted in you, that the person that you go to for protection is also the person that you are the most afraid of. Imagine then how you see God as both a source of comfort and fear. And love and fear do not coexist. So it's this dance of moving toward, nope, I'm afraid, and backing off, in and out, leading to this continual state of confusion as to where do I plant my feet to be safe? Where do you find yourself in these views of God, these false God images? Is God trustworthy? Is God responsive to my needs? Does God hear me? Does God love me? And ask these questions not from, oh, I know that. Doesn't matter what you know. What matters what you feel, you know. Because we can say all the right things with our brain, but if our body and our emotions and our nervous system and our gut and our spirit in here don't agree, we can talk to her blue in the face with our brain and it doesn't make a jack squat hill of beans a difference. What feels true? It doesn't mean it is true, but it doesn't matter that it isn't true because it's what we feel is true. So if we can't get honest about what we feel is true, we can't heal it. So ask yourself these questions and wait for your body to tell you the truth. If I say God is trustworthy, does your brain say yes and your body tense up? Does your brain say yes, but your body wants to run? Pay attention because this is not an accurate representation about what actually we believe. Is God reliable? Is God unpredictable? Is God distant? Is God both comfort and fear? Let's move then to our family roles because we internalize then these rules of how we had to behave, of the role we had to play, like an actor on the stage, in order to get care, in order to get love and belonging. So we talked about these roles in our last video. So we're just going to do a flyby. But if I am the golden child, if I am the hero of the family, if I am, remember, the one that makes the family look good and doesn't cause any trouble, then my worth is tied to performance. I have very high expectations because my authority figures had very high expectations of me, which then I adopted. So not only do I have high expectations of me, I have super high expectations of others. And therefore, authority becomes the person that rewards behavior. God becomes the judge that gives you a nod of approval for good behavior and punishes you for bad behavior. God is constantly evaluating you. You are in a, remember, you know how you get like a yearly performance evaluation at work? Well, when this is your experience, you are on a 24/7, 365 evaluation with God, just waiting for the red mark and the black mark, credit or debit, and it's always far more debit driven. Even when you get a good mark, it's never enough. It doesn't satisfy anything because you have to keep moving because God is the cosmic judge that is always evaluating your obedience, your ability to keep God pleased. And that is not the God that if you read the whole book that God is. God says, I love you. I am already pleased with you because I created you. And the more that we can learn to lean into love, the more we make choices that honor that love. There is no reality in which people get more experience with God's love and grace and turn into jackholes. That doesn't happen. We are so afraid that if we let people lean into grace, that they're going to turn into selfish jerks. That is not what happens when you truly experience love and grace. You become more loving and more gracious, more kind and more truthful. When you are the person that has to be perfect, that is driven by this bank account version of God, you will never ever have enough money in your account, so to speak. And so the invitation is to make a mistake and see what happens. Because it is only when we experience what happens, what else is possible when we do screw up, that we can trust that experience enough to actually make choices, because I am believing more and more that I am good, that who I truly have been created to be is good, and I want to let it out. You are not built to be driven by performance. You are meant to be driven by love. Let's talk about the family roles of scapegoat, also the more intense version of that, the identified patient and or addict. So remember, those roles in the family become the problem, meaning these people are the ones that are blamed for all the family problems, all the family anxiety, all the family drama. If you would just stop, we would be fine. And that's not true, but it's a really nice story. It's convenient. So if you learned growing up that you were the problem, that means that in order to survive, you absorbed the blame. You took it on. You believe that about yourself. And so God then becomes a persecutor that's already against you. In fact, we can turn this into kind of a courtroom thing. God is the prosecuting attorney. God is always trying to level charges against you. And yet, at the same time, God is also the disapproving judge, because that's the judge's job to say, yes, it is your fault. So you've got God is the prosecuting attorney who's against you, filing charges. God is the disapproving judge who is assigning blame against you. And God is also the jury and the executioner, because then God says, I am the problem. God says, you are in trouble, and therefore you will be punished. And I am always in trouble. God is always looking at me, expecting me to screw up. And guess what? When that's all we see, that's what we tend to do. When we are so afraid to fail, that's when we actually fail more. Because fear does not set us free to make great choices. And so it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy of, this is who I am, so this is who I have to be. God is therefore not the place of grace and mercy. God is the place of hellfire and brimstone. God is the bearer of smiting, not the bearer of love. When you are the parentified child and you've taken on more duties than a child is meant to be, then you have learned that you are valued for what you do for others. You learn that God then only approves of you when you are living a life that is defined by service and sacrifice. But this kind of service and sacrifice is not actually freely chosen, because you believe you have to do it in order to make God happy. So you don't get smited like your addict, IP, scapegoat, sibling. So therefore, this is not actually service and sacrifice. This is slavery. Because when you don't have a choice, that's not sacrifice. When you don't have a choice, that's not service. That makes you a slave, which means God is a taskmaster standing over you, not with just a clipboard and a calculator or a gavel, but a whip. So your value is only tied to giving until you bleed and giving more. There's no expectation that God is there for you at all. You are there for others only. Your value disappears. Your personhood vanished. And that reality for someone who is created by a loving God is a crime against humanity, because it takes the value that God has placed within every individual as very, very good and squashes it under a boot and says, more, do more, hustle more. Doesn't matter if you're sick. It doesn't matter if you're exhausted. It doesn't matter if you can barely even think coherently. Do more. That's a prison sentence. Lastly, we talked about the lost child, the person in the family that gets lost because of the bigger personalities of golden child versus scapegoat and parentified child as opposed to the mascot. And this lost child is literally lost, ceases to have any purpose or role. They're just there. And so you're often overlooked, forgotten, like Kevin in Home Alone, who got left at home and his whole entire family flew to France. Now, granted, he was a little bit of a brat, but his family forgot him. So therefore, if your authority figures often overlooked or ignored you or forgot that you existed, then of course God becomes the same. God is absent. There are so many scriptures that talk about how God is near, therefore this. Like one of the verses people talk about a lot is talking about how, I think it's Philippians 4, about don't be anxious for anything. We miss the part that comes right before that. God is near. Don't be anxious for anything. We separate that out. That's a classic lost child, because God ain't near. God is so far away that I can't count on God, because I learned that I'm invisible. And any of the strategies that we use, doing a lot, not doing anything, it doesn't seem to change that God's indifferent. God doesn't see me. And one of our basic human functions is we need people to mirror back that we are seen. And if God does not do that for us, it doesn't matter how many people who do. Let's look at Enneagram types really fast. So navigating with authority is about, our Enneagram type is about the strategy that we have adapted based on a story about what authority is and how it has been for me. And so type 1 will internalize authority as that critical inner voice of you should, you shouldn't, that drives perfection. And so therefore, God is perfectionistic, demanding, critical, unbending, rule driven, all about right. All of this is driven by a underlying belief that if I can be perfect enough, God will love me. Type 2s authority is relationships. So then authority is always held by the other person. The approval of others is what authority is for me. And so authority then is God needs you to care for others before you can get loved. Type 2, authority is our authority figures, our caregivers. Maybe we experienced needy parents. Maybe we experienced emotionally enmeshed parents. So God needs you to care for others before you get any of the leftover scraps. The approval of others saying you've done enough becomes the voice of God saying you can now be loved. Type 3, authority is performance. Authority is based on the scoreboard. Authority is based on achievement. Authority is achievement oriented. Therefore, God becomes the scorekeeper, the ultimate scorekeeper. You can see how that would keep relationship based on anything other than doing as really challenging to receive. Type 4, authority is inner feeling. Remember, the 4 is all about being my authentic, unique self. So truth is whatever feels authentic in the moment when we are not doing well. And so authority then is emotionally inconsistent because in the moment could be this one moment and next the moment. And so therefore God is just as elusive as the person that you're longing to know you and allow you to be your unique self in all of your ebbs and flows. God is just as elusive as relationships are that allow you to be you. Type 5. Authority becomes knowledge. That if I can understand and know more, then I will be safe. That information then becomes a way to control and to feel safe. And so then authority that gets in the way of knowledge, that gets in the way of me pursuing more information to feel safe, authority then is intrusive. Authority is overwhelming. Authority needs or demands more from me than I can safely give. And therefore, God is just as demanding and wants more than I am able to give. God wants to overwhelm me. God intrudes on me. God does not have boundaries. Type 6 internalizes a story that authority is external. So let me say that again. Type 6 internalizes a story that authority is external. So out here, external is what I'm going to cling to feel safe. A set of rules or an ideology or a group or a set of beliefs, laws, rules that I can cling to feel safe. And then controls me enough to feel safe, which means if I break the rules, I am out. If I rebel, I am out. Therefore, God is just as controlling and only keeps me safe if I am loyal. God continually will put things in my path to test my loyalty, which means in many ways, authority keeps us connected to belief systems or people systems or family systems or belief systems that keep us held there beyond what is good for us. God demands loyalty to a fault. Really? What fault? Type 7. Authority is connected to anything that keeps me feeling free. Authority is about possibility and anything, you can see how this is so opposite to a 6. 6 wants all the rules, 7 wants no rules. Constraints feel like threats to my freedom. There is a saying that goes something like, for people that, it just went out of my head, so never mind. Anything that threatens my ability to access freedom and to move in the moment is a threat. So authority then is restrictive. Authority is punishing. Authority keeps me from having fun. Authority keeps me from being able to go here and there and to suck the marrow out of life. So God's the killjoy. God is all about not wanting me to have fun. God is all about gloom and doom and keeping me held. And when all I want is to be free. Type 8. Authority is me. You can see how an avoidant attachment style would fit really well here because I am the only one I can count on, and I will not be put under authority to anyone. It's not safe. Authority has been oppressive to me. It has been overwhelming and suffocating and harmful to me. Therefore, God is a tyrant to resist. If I choose to do God, then God will be just as oppressive, just as smothering, just as overwhelming and harmful. And I must resist that at all costs. I am the only one that I can rely on to be authority for me. Lastly, type 9. Authority is peace and harmony, meaning I will work to avoid disruption and conflict at all costs. Safety is found in harmony and peace. Therefore, I'm going to avoid conflict. I'm going to dismiss my emotions. I'm going to dismiss the emotions of others. I'm going to do everything that I can to just keep the peace, to keep things calm, believing that that will keep me safe. But what that really creates is a God image that is passive and uninvolved. When we do everything we can to avoid conflict and just keep the peace, what we are saying is that I will never have needs. I will never have emotions. I will never connect deeply enough for people to disrupt that. So therefore, how can you connect to God? Because God can disrupt my peace, ironically enough. God will dismiss me. God will ask me to create conflict. God will ask me to build all the things that will disrupt my peace. So God is passive, uninvolved, so that I can just keep the peace. All of these ways that we project our own experience onto God creates a false self that needs a false God. And this false God is a God image that is shaped by not truth, but by our experience of unmet needs, by our experience of misattunement, by our experience of it's not okay to be me. And so we choose an adaptation to survive. These projections then of God, because of these false self adaptations, these aren't God. And yet they are our nervous system's way of trying to make sense of life and authority through our experience. So the invitation is not to shame and degrade and demean ourselves because this is what has happened. The invitation is to name and differentiate the projection, the false God image from the reality of the living God all around us, of the reality of the divine presence all around us, of the reality of we need our understanding of other, of godness, of divine, of otherness. We need that disrupted on a regular basis because we will always attempt to make God into what we can understand, which automatically reduces God to not God because we will always make God into a human image. So not only does this happen in a healthy divine relationship, that disruption of our assumptions, but it also is an important piece of the healing process to start pulling apart these stories about ourself and about other people and how those have projected a story onto God, this false God image that we follow. So the path back, the path to healing is to start replacing these projections, these adaptations with presence, with in this moment, with a, first of all, reclaiming of our goodness, our very, very goodness, that Hebrew word tov, our tovness as the foundational story of truth, to start bringing that tov goodness, this amazing harmony and skill set and giftings and calling and purpose that I was created with, to start bringing that story to bear with the grip of the I'm in trouble stories, to start to reclaim our original design as worthy and beloved, to reclaim the fact that our true self was created to thrive in connection with God's self and others. And any places where that connection is unreliable, inconsistent, untrustworthy, performance driven, those are places where the false self has projected false God, fear-based images. And to start releasing those fear-based images and to start to learn to reclaim and rest in grace-based images, in a grace-based loving relationship. This is messy because as we start to pull these threads, we start to dismantle structures that we've relied on for a really long time. Deconstruction is messy. It requires us to start to release control, which is an illusion anyway, but we really like to believe it, and to learn to what it means to surrender to the divine goodness, the presence of God, the spirit, the energy, the otherness all around us that already exists in me and around me, that seed of eternity that everyone has been planted in by an eternal creator that kind of calls us into this other reality that exists all around us. But in order to access and to start to bolster and heal that connection, the invitation is to release all of the ways that we have turned it off to stay safe. So to finish up, let me leave you with some questions based in Full Story Counseling's 3 motto words: curiosity, kindness, courage. So here are some questions. I'm going to ask again. Can you risk the mess? Can you risk releasing control? Can you risk what it means to surrender to the divine goodness that already exists all around me and in me? To take that risk is to ask, where do I project a false God image? And where might those places actually help us know what we need from God the most, what we need most healed within us? For example, if my belief system that I'm going to be in trouble if I don't do for others as a way of earning love, that tells me that my deepest desire is to be loved. Where can that information help to start opening our heart to receive love, not for what I do, but because of who I am? Can I offer compassion to myself, kindness to myself, where I needed that false self adaptation, and to start naming where do my misshapen views of God reveal where I've been harmed? Going back to the same example, if I've learned that I have to do for others in order to receive love, then I need my love story healed based on my identity and my value as me. I need healing in the story of I am worthy to be loved because I am me. And what fresh revelation of the divine image do you require to start setting free and releasing all of these other versions of God? So that as we start to release those and the fear that drives them, we can start to choose to engage God, not with fear and not with fear of punishment, but with an expectation and a hope and a desire to reconnect with grace and love and mercy and kindness, to release shame, to release fear, to release condemnation. And in that place where that space is made, to receive all the other gifts of love and joy and peace, and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness, gentleness, and a self-control that tells me who I am, not who I thought I had to be to earn it. You are invited to reimagine God and authority as safe. And what that looks like for you is about wrestling with where have I put on false self adaptations to stay safe? And where have I then had to create a false God in order to live in that false story? And the journey towards wholeness includes, requires a healing of our false God image, along with the healing of our false self story. I say all the time, we can never think our way to change. So engaging with the places where it doesn't matter what we think is true, but what do we believe, what do we feel in our gut and in our body and our emotions is true, and start to engage there. I'll put up a worksheet to help you ask some of these questions. And most of all, I invite you to join me in continuing to follow the invitation that God gives that says, try me. Let's find some freedom from fear. Let's find some freedom from the fear of being punished. And let's see what it is to surrender to the river of grace that flows around us all the time, to plug back into the socket of love and mercy and kindness and truth and forgiveness, and see what else is possible. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.